There's a lesson so dangerous that most people spend their entire lives running from it. They'll do anything to avoid it. They'll blame circumstances, point at other people, cite their childhood, their genetics, their bad luck, anything to keep this truth at arm's length. Because once you learn it, really learn it, deep in your bones, where it can't be unlearned, your entire life changes. Not gradually, not comfortably, but immediately, violently, like a bone snapping back into place. The pain is instant, but so is the healing. And here's why it's dangerous. This lesson doesn't give you permission to complain. It doesn't let you off the hook. It doesn't say, "It's okay, things were hard." Instead, it says something far more brutal and far more beautiful. It says, none of that matters. What matters is what you do now, what you choose now, how you respond now. And that responsibility, that total, complete, inescapable responsibility, is the most dangerous gift you'll ever receive. Because once you accept it, you can never go back to being a victim. And for most people, victimhood is the last comfort they have. The lesson is this: you are not controlled by what happens to you. You are controlled only by how you respond to it. Everything, every feeling, every outcome, every piece of your life is shaped, not by events, but by your interpretation of events, your reaction to them, your choice in the face of them. And the moment you truly understand this, the moment it stops being a nice idea and becomes a lived reality, everything changes. Because you realize you've been free this whole time. You just didn't know it. And that freedom is terrifying. The comfortable lie we tell ourselves. Let's start with the lie, the one that feels true, the one society reinforces, the one that makes you feel less alone in your struggle. The lie goes like this: I would be different if my circumstances were different. I would be successful if I had the right opportunities. I would be happy if people treated me better. I would be confident if I looked different, had more money, came from a better family. And this lie feels good because it gives you something to point at, something outside yourself, something that explains why you are the way you are. The lie is comfortable because it makes you the effect, not the cause. It puts control somewhere else, out there in the world, in other people's hands, in the economy, in your genetics, in your past. And as long as control is external, you're safe. Safe from responsibility. Safe from the terrifying realization that maybe, just maybe, you've been your own obstacle this whole time. Think about how often you've used these phrases in your mind. If only, because of, they made me, I had no choice. Each one is a tiny surrender, a small abdication of power. And we've been trained to think, this is humility, this is realism, this is just acknowledging the way things are. But it's not. It's a prison we build, one bar at a time, until we're so surrounded by external explanations that we can't see our own agency anymore. The truth is, most people prefer the lie, because the lie comes with something valuable, an excuse. When you believe external forces control you, you don't have to face the harder question. What if I'm the one holding myself back? What if my circumstances aren't the problem? What if I am? Not in a shameful way, but in an empowering way. Because if you're the problem, you're also the solution. But that realization is dangerous. It means you can't hide anymore. You can't wait for the world to change, for people to be different, for conditions to improve. You have to change now, with what you have, where you are. And that's heavy. It's so heavy that most people will spend decades building elaborate justifications for why they can't, when the real reason is they won't. Because won't requires owning something. And we've been taught that owning our failures makes us weak. But the Stoics knew different. The Stoic truth that breaks the chains. Epictetus was born a slave. Did you know that? He had every reason to believe external circumstances controlled him. He was literally owned by another human being. And yet from that position, from the bottom of the social hierarchy, he developed one of the most powerful philosophies of freedom ever conceived. He said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And this wasn't theory. This was survival. This was a man who had nothing external, no rights, no property, no freedom, discovering that he had everything internal, his mind, his choice, his response, and that no one could take those from him. Imagine being a slave and realizing you're freer than your master. Freer because you've mastered the one kingdom that matters, the kingdom within, while your master is enslaved to his desires, his fears, his need for control over others. He's trapped in a cage made of external dependencies. You've found freedom in the only place it ever existed, inside. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And he wrote this as emperor of Rome, surrounded by power and wealth. Yet he knew what Epictetus knew, that none of it, none of the external power mattered if he couldn't control his own reactions, his own thoughts, his own inner state. The emperor and the slave arrived at the same truth from opposite ends of the spectrum, which tells you something. The truth is universal. Your circumstances don't determine whether you can learn it. They just determine how hard you fight to avoid it. Here's what this means in practice. It means that when someone insults you, they don't make you angry. You choose anger in response to their words. When life doesn't go your way, it doesn't make you depressed. You choose depression as a response to unmet expectations. When you face obstacles, they don't stop you. You choose to be stopped by them. Every emotion, every reaction, every state of being is preceded by a choice. Often unconscious, often automatic, but still a choice. And the dangerous lesson is learning to see that choice, to catch it before it happens, to stretch that space between stimulus and response. And in that space, to become free. This is dangerous because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to blaming. You can't go back to, "they made me feel." You have to own it all. Every reaction, every outcome, every piece of your life. And that ownership is the heaviest and lightest thing you'll ever carry. Heavy because it's total, but light because it means you're no longer at the mercy of a world you can't control. You're operating from a place that's entirely yours. What you lose when you learn this. Let's be honest about the cost, because there is one when you accept radical responsibility. When you internalize this dangerous lesson, you lose something. You lose the right to complain. Not legally, obviously, but spiritually, morally, internally. You can't sit around talking about how unfair life is anymore, because you've accepted that fair and unfair are just stories. You can't bond with people over shared victimhood anymore, because you've stepped out of that circle. You lose the comfort of thinking, if only things were different, because you've accepted that things are what they are. And your job isn't to wish them different. Your job is to respond with clarity, with strength, with wisdom, regardless of what they are. You lose the ability to wait. You lose the luxury of saying, "I'll start when conditions are right," because you've learned that conditions are never right. They're just conditions, and you either move through them or you don't. You lose friends, some of them anyway, Because when you stop participating in the collective agreement that life is happening to us, some people will feel judged by your presence. They won't always say it, but they'll feel it. They'll sense that you've found something they're still avoiding, and instead of being curious, they'll become defensive. They'll call you cold, unrealistic, too hard on yourself, too intense. And maybe you are, but you can't go back. Now you've seen the truth. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And once you learn this lesson, you see it everywhere. You see how much suffering is self-created, how much is optional, how much is just a habit of interpretation. And you can't participate in that collective suffering anymore, not because you're superior, but because you've found the exit. And the exit is always internal, always available, always right there in the gap between what happens and what you make it mean. You also lose hope in a strange way. You lose hope that someone else will save you, that circumstances will shift, that the cavalry is coming, because you realize you're the cavalry. You're the only help that's coming. And that's both devastating and empowering. It's devastating because it means no more waiting, no more excuses, no more someday when. It's empowering because it means you already have everything you need. You've always had it. You just were looking outside when the answer was inside. This is the loneliness of the lesson too, because most people are still trapped in external explanations. They're still waiting for the world to change, for validation, for perfect conditions. And you can't join them anymore. You can love them, support them, but you can't pretend with them. You can't nod along when they say, "if only," because you know. And knowing changes everything. The terror of total freedom. Here's what people don't tell you about freedom. It's not comfortable. It's not relaxing. It's not a vacation. Real freedom, total freedom. The freedom that comes from knowing you're not controlled by anything external. That's heavy, because it means everything is on you. Every outcome, every result, every quality of your life is your responsibility. And that's terrifying. Most people don't want that kind of freedom. They want freedom from consequences. Freedom to do what they want without paying the price. But that's not freedom. That's fantasy. The dangerous lesson teaches you different. Freedom. The freedom that comes with accepting that you're the author. You're writing this story every day, with every choice, with every reaction, with every interpretation. And you can't blame the pen, can't blame the paper, can't blame the prompt life gave you. It's your story, and it's being written right now. Not tomorrow, not someday, right now. And you're holding the pen, whether you realize it or not. Viktor Frankl survived Nazi concentration camps, places where every external freedom was stripped away, where human beings were reduced to numbers, subjected to unimaginable horror. And in that hell, he discovered something that his captors couldn't take. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Think about that. He's in a death camp, watching people die every day, starving, cold, brutalized, and he discovers freedom. Not the freedom to leave, but the freedom to choose his response, to choose his attitude, to choose what the suffering means. And that choice, that internal sovereignty, saved him. Not physically at first, but spiritually. He found something that made him untouchable, internally, even while everything external was being destroyed. Now bring that back to your life. Whatever you're dealing with, whatever circumstances you think are holding you back, whatever excuses you've been holding on to, can they really compare to a concentration camp? And if Frankl could find freedom there, if Epictetus could find it as a slave, what's your excuse? This is the terror of the lesson. It removes every excuse. It strips away every rationalization and leaves you with just yourself and your choices. And that's naked. That's vulnerable. That's real. Some people run from this their whole lives. They bounce from ideology to ideology, from guru to guru, from explanation to explanation, always looking for something that will give them permission to not take full responsibility. Something that will say, it's okay, it's not your fault. You don't have to change, you just have to understand. But understanding without action is just another cage, and the dangerous lesson doesn't let you stay in cages. What you gain when you accept it. But here's what most people miss in the terror. They don't see the gift. They don't see what you gain when you accept this lesson. When you truly internalize it, you gain something that nothing can take from you. Something that doesn't depend on circumstances or other people or luck or timing. You gain yourself. You become unshakable, not because nothing bothers you, but because you know that whatever happens, you'll handle it. You'll choose a response. You'll find a way. Maybe not immediately, maybe not perfectly, but you'll move. You won't be frozen. You won't be helpless. You won't be waiting for someone else to fix it. You'll act. This creates a kind of confidence that's different from the confidence the world usually sells. The world wants you to believe confidence comes from external validation, from achievements, from appearance, from status. But that confidence is fragile, because it depends on things you can't fully control. Real confidence, the confidence that comes from this dangerous lesson, is rooted in something deeper. It's rooted in the knowledge that you are the primary force in your life, that you can respond to anything, that you've faced hard things before, and you'll face them again, and you'll keep moving. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Once you accept that you're responsible for your response, every obstacle becomes an opportunity, not in some toxic positive way, but in a real practical way. Because obstacles reveal what you're made of. They show you where you're strong, where you need to grow. They force you to develop capacities you didn't know you had. And when you stop seeing them as things happening to you, and start seeing them as things you're responding to, the entire frame shifts. You also gain clarity, massive clarity, because you're no longer wasting energy on things you can't control. You're not spinning your wheels, wondering why people don't change, why the world isn't fair, why things didn't go your way. You accept what is, and you focus all your energy on what you can control. Your thoughts, your actions, your responses, your character. And that focus, that concentration of energy, creates results. It creates momentum. It creates change. There's a peace that comes with this too. Not the peace of having everything figured out, but the peace of knowing that whatever comes, you're the one who decides what it means. Bad news doesn't destroy you, because you know you'll decide how to respond. Good news doesn't make you, because you know it's still just external. Your center, your core, your sense of self stays steady, not because nothing moves you, but because you're rooted in something internal, something that circumstances can't touch. And strangely, you gain compassion, because once you realize how much power you have, how much responsibility you carry, you start to see that everyone else has that same power, that same responsibility. and most people don't know it. They're trapped in their own stories, their own external explanations. And instead of judging them, you understand, because you were there too. You know how comfortable the lie is, how hard the truth is, and you can meet people with patience, with understanding, even as you refuse to participate in their illusions. The practice of living it, knowing the lesson, intellectually doesn't change anything. You can understand this idea, agree with it, even teach it, and still live like you don't believe it. The real work is in the practice, the daily, moment-by-moment application of this truth. And that's where most people fail. Not because they don't understand, but because they don't practice. Here's what practice looks like. It starts with catching yourself in the moment when something happens, and you feel that automatic reaction, that surge of blame, that thought, "This shouldn't be happening," or "They shouldn't have done that." You catch it, you notice it, and instead of following that thought into anger, into resentment, into victim mode, you pause, you breathe, and you ask, "What's my response going to be?" Not "what should happen," not "who's to blame," but "what's my response?" And in that question, you reclaim your power. You step out of reaction and into choice. Maybe you still feel angry. Maybe you still feel hurt. But you're not controlled by it. You're choosing what to do with it, how to channel it, whether to express it or transmute it into something else. This practice is hardest with the small things, the minor irritations, the daily frustrations. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Your coffee order is wrong. A colleague dismisses your idea. These moments, they seem insignificant, but they're where the real training happens. Because if you can maintain your center in the small moments, if you can choose your response when it doesn't really matter, then when the big moments come, when it really matters, you'll have built the capacity to respond with wisdom. Epictetus taught his students to practice with small discomforts. Deliberately put yourself in uncomfortable situations, not to torture yourself, but to train yourself to learn that you can handle discomfort, that it doesn't control you. Take cold showers, not because they're fun, but because they teach you that your response is separate from the stimulus, that you can be uncomfortable and still centered, still in control of your inner state. And when you fail, because you will, when you catch yourself hours after the fact, realizing you reacted instead of responded, that you blamed instead of owned, that you waited for external change instead of creating internal change, don't collapse. Don't use it as evidence that you can't do this. Just notice it. That's feedback, not failure. The fact that you noticed means you're waking up. And next time, maybe you'll catch it sooner. Maybe in the moment. Maybe before. This is a lifelong practice, not a destination. You don't arrive at perfect responsibility. You just get better at seeing your choices faster, at responding with more wisdom, more clarity, more alignment with who you want to be. And that progress, however slow, however imperfect, is everything. Because each time you choose response over reaction, you're proving to yourself that you're not controlled, that you're free, and that proof accumulates. The ripple effect. Here's what they don't tell you about accepting this lesson. It doesn't just change you, it changes everything around you. When you stop blaming, when you stop waiting, when you start owning your responses fully, people notice. They may not say anything, they may not even consciously realize it, but they feel something different in you, something solid, something steady. Some people will be drawn to it. They'll want to know what changed, how you became so calm, so clear, so unmoved by things that used to shake you. And you won't always have words for it, because it's not something you can teach in a conversation. It's something they have to discover themselves. But your presence can point the way. Your example can show them it's possible. Others will resist it. They'll push back. They'll try to pull you back into the old patterns, back into collective complaining, back into blaming, back into waiting for the world to change. Because your shift makes them uncomfortable. It reminds them that they have a choice too, and they're not ready to face that. So they'll test you. They'll say you've changed, that you don't understand, that you've become cold or disconnected, and you'll have to decide how to respond to that too. Because that's the thing now. Everything is practice. Every interaction, every challenge, every moment is an opportunity to either prove the lesson or forget it. And some days you'll forget. Some days you'll slip back into old patterns, and that's okay. That's human. What matters is that you catch yourself faster, that you return to the truth more quickly, that you keep practicing. The ripple effect goes deeper, though. When you live from this place of radical responsibility, when you stop making excuses and start making moves, your life changes. Not always in the ways you expect, not always on the timeline you want, but it changes because you're no longer waiting, you're acting. And action creates results, creates momentum, creates opportunities that waiting never could. Your relationships change too, because you stop trying to control other people. Stop needing them to be different, to make you happy, to validate you. You start relating to them as they are, and paradoxically, that creates more real connection than all your previous attempts at control. Because now, you're meeting them from a place of freedom, not from a place of need. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And this lesson, this dangerous lesson about radical responsibility, is the key to that privilege. Because you can't become who you truly are while you're still blaming, while you're still waiting, while you're still convinced that external forces control your internal state. You have to take ownership, total ownership, of every response, every choice, every moment. And in that ownership, you discover yourself. The point of no return. There comes a moment in this journey, a moment when you realize you can't go back. You've seen too much, learned too much, practiced too much, and the old way of living, the way where you were the victim, the way where circumstances controlled you that way, doesn't fit anymore. It's like trying to put on clothes you wore as a child. They're too small, they constrict, they don't work. This is the point of no return, and it's both liberating and isolating. Because you realize most people are still living in the old way, still blaming, still waiting, still convinced that they're at the mercy of forces outside themselves. And you can't join them anymore. You can love them, you can be patient with them, but you can't pretend to see the world the way they see it. Some people call this awakening, but that's too gentle. It's more like having your eyes forced open, like staring into the sun until you see the spots. Even when you close them, you can't unsee the responsibility you carry, the power you have, the freedom you've always had. And once you see it, once you really see it, life becomes simpler, not easier, but simpler. Because the question is no longer, why is this happening to me? The question is, how am I going to respond? And that question, that simple shift in framing changes everything, because it puts you back in the driver's seat. It reminds you that you're not a passenger in your own life. You're not being driven by fate or luck or other people's choices. You're driving. And yeah, the road is rough. There are obstacles. There are detours. There are things you can't control. But you can control the wheel. And that's enough. That has to be enough, because it's all you've got. Seneca wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." The dangerous lesson teaches you to stop frightening yourself, to stop suffering in imagination, to stop creating elaborate stories about why you can't, why you shouldn't, why it's not your fault. Instead, you look at what is. You accept it without judgment, without resistance. And then you respond. You move. You act. Not from fear, but from choice. And that movement, that action, becomes your life, becomes your character, becomes proof that you were never controlled by anything except your own beliefs about what controlled you. Living as a free man. So what does it look like to live this lesson fully? It looks quiet. Honestly, it looks like someone who doesn't need to explain themselves, who doesn't argue with reality, who doesn't collapse when plans change. It looks like steady forward movement, not fast, not dramatic, just consistent, just clear, just aligned. It looks like someone who hears criticism and considers it without being destroyed by it, who hears praise and appreciates it without being inflated by it, because they know that external voices are just information, not verdicts, not commands, just data points that they can use or discard based on what serves their growth, their path, their truth. It looks like someone who faces obstacles and sees them as part of the path, not as evidence that they're on the wrong path, who understands that resistance is where growth happens, that comfort is overrated, that the goal isn't to avoid difficulty, but to develop the capacity to handle it with grace, with wisdom, with strength. Living this lesson means you become someone who doesn't need perfect conditions to move, who doesn't need everyone's approval to decide, who doesn't need guarantees before starting, because you've learned that the only guarantee is that you'll respond, you'll choose, you'll handle it, and that's enough. That's everything. Marcus Aurelius lived this. He was emperor with absolute external power, and he could have blamed anyone for anything, could have hidden behind his position, his responsibilities, his burdens. But instead, he wrote to himself reminders of his own agency, his own responsibility. You have power over your mind, not sometimes, not when things are easy, always, in every moment, under every circumstance. That power is always there, always available, always yours, and no one can take it unless you give it away. And that's the final piece of the dangerous lesson. You've been giving it away. You've been handing over your power, your peace, your center, to everyone and everything around you. And you called it being affected, being human, being realistic. But it was just surrender. Surrender to the belief that external forces matter more than internal choices. And they don't. They never did. They never will. The choice that's always waiting. Right now, in this moment, you have a choice. The same choice you've always had. But maybe now you see it more clearly. You can keep living like circumstances control you, like other people's actions determine your state, like you're at the mercy of a world you can't change. Or you can accept the dangerous lesson. You can take full responsibility, not blame, not shame, but ownership of every response, of every reaction, of every choice, from this moment forward. This choice is terrifying because it's total. There's no half accepting this truth. You can't own some of your responses and outsource others. You can't be sovereign on good days and victim on bad days. It's all or nothing. Either you're in control of your inner world or you're not. And that decision, that commitment, is the heaviest, lightest, most dangerous, most freeing choice you'll ever make. If you choose the lesson, if you really choose it, your life won't get easier immediately. You won't suddenly have all the answers. You won't stop facing challenges. What changes is you. You become someone who faces challenges differently, who handles uncertainty with more grace, who remains steady when everything shakes. Not because you're superhuman, but because you've remembered something. You never needed to be saved. You needed to stop waiting for salvation. The Stoics didn't promise you an easy path. They promised you freedom, and that freedom comes with a price. The price is responsibility. Total, complete, inescapable responsibility for your inner world. And when you pay that price, when you accept that weight, you discover it's not weight at all. It's wings. Because you're no longer carrying the burden of trying to control what you can't. You're focused on what you can. And that focus, that clarity, that singular direction is power. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, before the day starts, before the demands come, before the world asks for your reaction, take a moment and remember this lesson. Remember that whatever happens today, you get to choose your response. You're not at the mercy of anything except your own habitual patterns, and those patterns only have the power you keep giving them. So stop giving your power away. Stop waiting for perfect conditions. Stop blaming circumstances and start owning every moment, every choice, every response. Because here's what the dangerous lesson really teaches. You've been free this whole time. You just didn't know it. You thought you needed permission. You thought you needed better circumstances. You thought you needed someone to save you. But you didn't. You never did. You just needed to realize that the cage you've been living in has always been unlocked. And all you had to do was push. So push. Walk out into the terrifying, beautiful freedom of knowing that your life is your responsibility, that your responses are your choice, that no one and nothing controls you unless you let them, and that letting them is also a choice, which means you can unchoose it. You can reclaim your power right now, this moment, not someday, not when things improve, not when you feel ready, now. Because the dangerous lesson, the one that changes everything, is this simple truth. You've always been the author of your story. You just forgot. And the moment you remember, the moment you take the pen and start writing with intention, with choice, with full responsibility, that's when your real life begins. Stay focused, stay grounded. The most dangerous truth you'll ever learn is that you've always had the power to change everything. And now that you know, you can never go back. You can only move forward into the terrifying freedom of being fully, completely, inescapably responsible for who you become. And that responsibility, that's not a burden, it's a gift. The most dangerous gift you'll ever receive.